Hello and welcome to the Gay Cruise and Travel podcast with me, Just Joey T, brought to you by Just Joey Travels. All right, we're doing one of my favorite types of podcast episodes, which is responding to your questions and comments. I know you guys, every so often, there will be a question or comment that pops up into the comment section of my YouTube channel, Just Joey T. I've trained myself many years ago in the earlier days of social media to not look at comments all the time because comment sections are a dark place. It's the same reason I am not really on Reddit because I feel like most of Reddit is just one giant comment section. So that's why I do encourage you guys, if you have any questions or comments about anything, put them in the YouTube comments. But what I like to do, instead of checking the comments all day, every day, once in a while, like today, I will go through the comments and I will pick out your questions and comments, and then I will reply to you or comment on your comments on the air, which is what we're doing today. I love doing this because it's a great way for me to interact with everybody. Obviously, a podcast is kind of like a one-way medium, so I love it when you guys do have questions for me or have some comments about some cruise or travel related thing. So here we go. First one is a question from @RustyNailPizza. On the Atlantis site for the February cruise, this is the big party cruise in February coming up, it said the main pool deck will be transformed into the main dance floor. Is this accurate? I know the solarium is smaller on Symphony than the first 3 Oasis class ships. So for context, so I know exactly what this person is talking about, like what they're asking about, but just for context, if you don't know what the solarium thing is or like all this stuff or like why this is a big deal, most Atlantis cruises on most ships, Atlantis would try to have most of the nighttime dance parties poolside. That's kind of like the default. That's what they try to do on as many ships as possible. The Royal Caribbean Oasis class ships, which are some of the largest cruise ships in the world, their pool deck, because they're so massive, the layout is different. The pool deck on a lot of those ships in that class, in Atlantis' eyes, is not conducive to hosting the nighttime dance parties. But there is a different part of the ship, not where the pool is, called the solarium. Same level as the pool deck, but it's at the very front. And it's like semi-indoor, semi-outdoor space that I personally hate for a nighttime party. We won't get into why, otherwise we'll be here for 3 hours. Anyways, the February party cruise that Atlantis has been sailing for several years now, they've always just had the nighttime dance parties at this solarium place instead of the poolside. So basically for the Symphony of the Seas coming up February 2026, the website is advertising that it's going to be back on the pool deck. Thank you, Rusty Nail Pizza, for bringing this up because I didn't see this. I just assumed we'd be back onto the solarium. And the Symphony is a little different because that's the other part that is kind of critical to know. Within the Oasis class of ships, there are several ships in that class. There was the Oasis, was the original one, and then the Allure and the Harmony came after. I don't know which one was second or third, but like they were some of the earlier ships of the class. Some of the newer ships in that class, though, including the Symphony, has been what's called amplified, quote unquote, according to Royal Caribbean. You know how in the car world, there's like a Honda Civic that is released, like some brand new Honda Civic. But then 2 or 3 years later, they'll give it like a facelift. So it's mostly the same car, but like, you know, they'll like tweak the styling, they'll add some features here and there. So it's not like a full redesign, but it's like sometimes a significant nip and tuck. That's what amplify is. You know, that's what Royal Caribbean calls when they amplify a ship. So they do take old ships and they bring it up to the so-called amplified standard. But for some of the newer ships, they would just build it right to that amplified standard that they're applying to older ships to give those older ships a facelift. Okay, it's kind of I'm a car person, that's how I use that analogy. So Symphony was built from the start when it was being constructed to up to that newer amplified standard. Whereas the older ships, the Oasis, the Allure, the Harmony, the ones that we've sailed before in previous years in February, they have not gone through this facelift of this amplification. And it does change, some parts of the layout of the ship, including, the pool deck, for example. There are changes there. So, sorry, this is like a lot for context, but back to your original question, will the parties on the February Symphony cruise be poolside? So here's where going with Just Joey T and Just Joey Travels, you guys have the Joey advantage, okay? I did a little sleuthing, okay? And as far as I can tell, this is accurate. They are going to try to have the nighttime pool parties not in the solarium. They're going to try to have it poolside. Now, this is not a guarantee. I don't have a confirmation, so I just want to put it there. But with all the sleuthing and research that I did after I saw this comment, as far as I know, it is going to be poolside, which I love. In 2020, like this is right before the pandemic when they had this party cruise, I think that year they did do it poolside, and I actually really liked it. I hate the solarium. It's horrible space for a nighttime party. When you're poolside, you get basically this large, flat, rectangular dance floor, which is great. It's easy. In the solarium, it's not a flat surface. It's like all this like random shit you're gonna like run into. It's dark. It's packed with people. You don't know where you're gonna like run into like a bench or like seats or like and it's not rectangular. It's like all these weird things, and it's just horrible in my opinion. Like I fucking hate the fucking solarium so fucking much. As far as I can tell, on the Symphony Cruise in 2026, it is going to be by the pool, the nighttime parties. There is a chance, because I have volunteered with Atlantis before, and they do sometimes do this, when they actually set up all the audio and the lights and the lasers and everything the first day of the cruise, when the passengers are starting to get on board, they kind of are loading all the AV stuff, the lighting, the lasers, all the party equipment, okay? And they actually start setting up that stuff where they would like the party venues to be. Once in a great while, they'll start to set up, and then they realize when they're actually setting up all the equipment for the parties, oh, this can't work here. So they'll go to like an alternate. It's a slight chance that could happen. So I feel like they will try to do it at the pool. Assuming nothing goes wrong, then it's going to stay there. But I feel like, there is still like that slight chance it might be in the solarium if in case on boarding day, they're setting up all the stuff by the poolside and they run into some sort of issue that could not have foreseen, which meant like, okay, maybe it won't work for them. So don't take it as like a guarantee, but I feel like that is their aim. Cool. Did we just spend like 15 minutes on that question? Okay, moving on. This next one is a comment from Justin Williams, 1861. And I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. It's a longer comment. So Justin just went on his first cruise, which is the 10-day Mediterranean cruise, August of this year. It was just seeing how he had a pretty good experience going at it as a first-timer. He wanted to see Egypt. It was on his bucket list. He was traveling solo, and he did have some reservations about, not vibing with other passengers or like the onboard atmosphere. He basically, that was kind of like the gist of it. And I have given advice before when I talk about when I talk about the Mediterranean cruises and when I talk about some of the longer cruises, longer being more than a week. A standard cruise is like 7 nights. And some of the cruises are 10 nights, 11 nights, 12 nights, especially the ones that are in Europe or Asia. They tend to be longer. And I usually don't recommend for a brand new cruiser, you've never been on a cruise before, to go on a longer cruise. 95% of new cruisers that go on Atlantis cruise like it because they want to go back on a different one. They want to go again. But, just in case you're like part of the 5% that's indifferent, or maybe you find out cruising is not for you, the Atlantic cruises are not for you, to have spent that amount of money, because I said cruises are not cheap, and the longer the cruises are, the more expensive it is, okay? So just in case the cruising experience is not for you, you're not going to find out, probably until like the first or second day. That's when you're like a couple of days in, that's when you start to find out whether it's for you or not. Either like it, like the 95% of people, or you're indifferent or you don't like it. Okay. To be stuck on the ship for like another 7 or 8 days, it's not great. And especially if you had to like fly long distance to take that cruise. That's why, for the Med cruises that was just announced for 2026, and I remember saying on that podcast, if you want to see Europe, okay, that's kind of like the main reason for doing the European cruises. There's no point in flying from the US all the way to Europe if you don't want to take that cruise if you don't want to see Europe. Because the whole point of the Mediterranean cruises is the places that the ship stops at. If you're not going to get off the ship, there's no reason. And I was like, well, it's a 10-day cruise. It's not just a week. You're going to have to pay. Flying to Europe isn't cheap during the summer. Airfare is more expensive. If you're going to spend all that money, it's just a higher risk that, if you don't like the cruise or whatever, you spend all this money, you're just going to feel bad. That's my general advice, but for your particular situation, it could be different. But I'm glad for Justin that it worked out. Moving on. Question from Chris Rocks Duh. How far ahead of the cruise do they release the party themes? I replied to Chris and I said usually 1 to 2 months before, but can be variable from sailing to sailing. This made me laugh because, how do I say this nicely? Communications from Atlantis is highly variable. I think that's the most charitable way I can say it without lying to you, to the listeners here. I think in the ideal world, we would get them, I don't know, a couple months before. But I've seen sailings where we didn't get it until like 3 weeks before. And for the people that want to have outfits to the party themes, which is like a really fun thing to do, sometimes just having 3 weeks, it's not enough time because you might want to like order something from Amazon or Etsy or whatever. Sometimes things come overseas from like Asia for some of like the outfit pieces, and maybe that it takes like a week to arrive. And, you need to pack up everything, a few days before you fly out for the cruise. So instead of having 3 weeks, you only really have like 2. Usually, I think they try to get it out as early as possible, but it is like pretty variable. But very generally, like 3 to 5 weeks. It's always funny to me when you go on the Facebook groups. This is a question that people ask all the time. And I guess for new cruisers, they would be curious. But I find it hilarious when the seasoned cruisers ask this question because it's like, okay, that there's no point in asking. Like, it'll come out when it come out. Okay? All right. The next one is kind of a comment from Matt Fuji V1I. I think the new service charge, so they're talking about the Med cruises, the 2 Med cruises coming up in 2026 in July. I think the new service charge is actually a change from Virgin Voyages. They revamped their tiers of booking over the summer, and I remember reading something about how they now include a service charge up front for bookings too. Apparently, it was always included as part of the base price, but they've now just separated out for transparency. So basically, for context, for all the Virgin sailings, at least the Virgin Atlantis sailings to date that has happened until now, the gratuities have been included in like the base price. So you're basically paying the base price that's advertised, and then you would pay the port fees, and then that was your upfront cost. For the Med cruises, it's a little bit different. They've broken out the gratuities to be separate. And the way they're charging it is a fixed dollar amount per day of the cruise, but they don't charge it until the end of the cruise. They just kind of add it to your account. When you go on a cruise, you register a credit card and you link it to your room when you check in for the cruise or when you do the registration online before you set sail. Anything you buy, whenever you spend money on the cruise, it just goes into your account, and at the end of the cruise, you settle your account. So the service charge is basically added to your onboard account, and you settle at the end of the sailing, basically. So that was a change, and I did make sure to point that out because when I was like looking up the pricing when it was first announced, I was like, okay, this looks different. This is different. So that's what this comment is talking about. Yeah, it sounds like it's something that Virgin is doing, not Atlantis. The prepaid gratuities, Atlantis doesn't really have, they don't have full control over that. Gratuities are a standard thing for cruise lines to charge. So yeah, there you go. Okay, question from Dan Bergstrom. If you miss the initial embarkation in Miami for a Miami cruise, let's say, and fly to the first port destination the next day, will they let you board the cruise then? And I actually replied in line, and my reply was, it depends on the exact itinerary and the cruise line. There's some laws around this that might make this illegal, and a cruise line usually has no obligation to allow it. So yeah, it does. There are actually laws that govern whether this is possible or not. It kind of depends what stops the ship is going to make, where those ports are, like in what jurisdiction, and there are different regulations about that, and whether it's like a closed loop cruise where the cruise comes back to like the original port or not. So there's no blanket yes or no. It really depends on not just the itinerary of the cruise, the stops that the cruise is going to go at, all the ports of call, but it also has to do with, is it like a U.S. sailing? Is it sailing out of the U.S. or sailing out of like a different country? And it also depends on cruise line policy, because a cruise line technically has no obligation to let you do it. So basically what I'm trying to say is do everything you can to not miss embarkation. I did a whole podcast episode talking about the top reasons that people miss the initial boarding for a cruise. And I also offered suggestions for how to mitigate against all that risk, mitigate against all those top reasons that people miss a cruise. So if you follow my advice on that, then the chance of you missing a cruise is going to be like so minute that you don't have to worry about this. Even if it was possible for you to fly to the first port destination like the next day or like the day after, you're going to have to get there at your own expense. You're now going to have to spend extra money to like fly to like wherever. Let's say it's a sailing out of Miami and the first stop for the cruise is San Juan in Puerto Rico. You would now have to get yourself from Miami, and you went there, but you missed the initial embarkation. Now you have to get yourself to San Juan, Puerto Rico with all your luggage and everything. It's also not just the money. It's also like the extra stress you're going to incur. And also just like the extra logistical hassle. I think a legitimate reason is if you have like some sort of emergency that like a family emergency or like whatever that you like take care of. I mean, that's where like travel insurance kicks in. You might not be able to like get on the cruise, but at least you can get some of your money back and you can take that money, get some of it back, and then you can go on to another cruise. There's always going to be another cruise. All right. Next one is the comment from Ofart Ron. Hi, Ron. I've met you before. Ron is a longtime listener and follower. Hey, Joey, I just went on the Virgin Halloween cruise, the one that was just a couple months ago. I think the Virgin ship sucks. Royal Caribbean has them beat 10-1. With the exception of the showers, otherwise, the cruise was a fart. And I was curious because I personally like the Virgin ships more than most of the Royal Caribbean ships that Atlantis charters. This is what I said. I pointed out some of the things that was nice. Did you not even like the free Wi-Fi, the free non-alcoholic beverages, and more free food? Because on a Virgin ship, all the restaurants are free. Whereas on Royal Caribbean, they have the more traditional setup of they have some free restaurants and they have some specialty, i.e. paid restaurants. And then Ron said he didn't care about the Wi-Fi. He's either asleep or walking around. He's trying to watch his diet a little bit, trying to eat a little bit more healthy. And he's not a big eater. It doesn't sound like he was kind of interested in trying out different foods. I've said before, the cruise is what you've made it. Okay, you can do a cruise any way that you want. There's no right or wrong way to do a cruise. When I said that, I think the Virgin cruise is better. When I'm on the podcast, when I give advice, I have to give generalized advice. If you don't care for free Wi-Fi, which I feel like it's not the bulk of people, I feel like most of you would enjoy and appreciate free Wi-Fi. I think most of you would appreciate not being charged for non-alcoholic beverages. And I think most of you would appreciate having a larger selection and a larger options of free restaurant options. For most people, if you don't like trying new foods, you just drink water. I actually drink water most of the time personally, and you don't care for the Wi-Fi, yeah, okay. maybe the Virgin ship is not going to be, these are some of the prime advantages of sailing with Virgin. If you are not into any of those things, it's not going to make that much of a difference. So that's where we have this little back and forth in the comments. All right. Next comment is from Delmar106. And they're talking about the February cruise coming up with Royal Caribbean. It says, no Haiti for Royal Caribbean. It's been canceled for cruises till April 2026, which affects the February Caribbean cruise. I'm just going to triple check because Atlantis will update their website when something happens. For example, technically, if you look on the Atlantis website today, it's Wednesday, December the 3rd as I'm recording this, but this is not going to go up until next week. I'm pre-recording some stuff because I've got a trip coming up. Labadee, which is in Haiti, is still listed. So from Atlantis's point of view, and also for the cruise line, itineraries and ports of call are always subject to change. I have been on cruises before. This is no joke. Itineraries are never set in stone. Never, never, never. Because if some unexpected weather comes in, they will divert to a different port the day of or the day before. It can be a very last minute thing. And I have been on Atlantis cruises where they've done that for various weather or operational reasons. No one knew that they were going to do it when everyone was boarding the ship. It wasn't until the night before, the day before, that they announced to everyone, oh, we're going to spend an extra day at sea tomorrow instead of the whatever, and we're going to go to a different port or whatever like that. So even up to the very last minute, the itinerary and the ports of call can change because of reasons like that. I think they still have Labadee listed because they're probably still figuring out what changes they need to make, assuming that Haiti is off the whatever. I've been to Labadee before on a cruise. It's kind of like a private section of Haiti just for Royal Caribbean. It's kind of like their little semi-private section of it. So we'll see what happens. But until Atlantis and Royal Caribbean work out exactly what the itinerary is, if they are going to replace Haiti, or is it just going to be an extra sea day? Are they going to replace it with something else? I'm assuming they'll replace it with something else because if they don't go to Labadee, they'll just have San Juan and Saint Martin. 2 stops on a 7-day cruise is very low. Usually there's 3, sometimes there's 4. To stop twice, it's that's a lot of days at sea. So some people on the interwebs have talked about, oh, why doesn't the ship go to Coco Cay? So Royal Caribbean, they have, I don't know, have the entire island, but they have this private island or private part of a island that's called Perfect Day at Coco Cay. And one time on an Atlantis cruise, we did stop there. I don't remember exactly which one, but we did go, I think maybe it was 2022, 2023. Anyways, so Atlantis did one time stop there. When we went there, it was a last minute substitution. The cruise was not supposed to go to Coco Cay. And usually Atlantis cruises don't go there because usually they have 2 cruises that are docked at any one time. It's a big enough place that you can have 2 sets of passengers all kind of enjoying the island. It's a pretty big place. So usually they have 2 ships that are docked. So the Atlantis typical set of passengers does not mix well with the typical Royal Caribbean set of passengers, i.e. families and seniors and kids and everything. The gays are just, you can't mix gays with families. You can't take a typical family Royal Caribbean cruise, because Royal Caribbean cruises, a lot of them are family oriented. There's a lot of kid space, teenage spaces on the ships that they design. So could you just imagine having a giant ship of gays, 5,500 gays on one ship, and then the other ship that's docked is another 5,000 passengers of just moms and dads and little kids. And they all get off at Coco Cay and they're all sharing the island. It just doesn't work. And Atlanta knows this. That's why the ship doesn't usually go there. The one time we went there, again, it was a last minute thing. It was not the original itinerary. They had to make a detour. And it just happened that particular day, no other ship was going to Coco Cay. So the Atlantis ship had Coco Cay all to ourselves for 6 or 7 hours or something for however long we're docked. We had the whole place to ourselves. It was super awesome. We had like a little dance party, not like a tea dance, like an impromptu thing. They had like music playing by like the pool. This like giant pool area. It was actually really fun. I would love for us to go back to Coco Cay. It was like literally the gayest island on earth for those like 6 or 8 hours. Nearly everybody got off the ship, and it was like so great that we lucked out and got to go to Coco Cay. But they usually can't plan for Atlantis to go there for the reasons I just explained. It would be very lucky if we got to go to Coco Cay instead of Labadee. All right, moving on to a question from Burning Scout. I'm going on the LA Mexico cruise in April 2026. This will be my first cruise. I have booked a Sea Terrence cabin. The ship looks beautiful. When can we make dinner reservations? This is another thing that trips up quite a few cruisers. So cruise lines like Royal Caribbean, Virgin, Celebrity, whatever, they have their own mobile app and they have their own website, okay? And on a typical, like not Atlantis charter, just on like a regular Royal Caribbean sailing, a regular Virgin sailing, whatever it is, you get to book certain things on board in advance, usually like weeks in advance. You can reserve certain shows. You can reserve tables at certain restaurants, things like that. So this is what this person's asking about. When can we make dinner reservations? When it's an Atlantis charter, sometimes things happen differently. And for example, on Royal Caribbean, when it's just a regular Royal Caribbean sailing, a sailing that they just run themselves and it's not chartered out to a company like Atlantis, they have like different processes and different types of dining that goes out the window when Atlantis comes in and does it. So they have something called dining anytime versus a set time for dining at the main dining hall on most Royal Caribbean cruises. So it's either you pick a fixed time and you do that, or you can go to the dine anytime option, and then there's like certain times where you can go and don't go. With Atlantis, they just throw that out the window. It's basically, okay, dining hours, dinner hours at the main dining is like 6 to 9, and you just show up, kind of like a regular restaurant, and you just queue, and there's like no reservations. So that's why for Atlantis charters, usually you can make a dinner reservation as far ahead advance as on just like a regular cruise that's not an Atlantis charter. Sometimes it's funny because I see people like, oh, they get access to their booking on the Royal Caribbean app or the Virgin app. And they will see, oh, I can book shows and I can book entertainment, I can book activities on the web, and they start booking it only to find out that a little later on, a few days later or like the next week, all the bookings are wiped out. Shore exit is another thing that people want to book early as well. Because when Atlantis charters a ship, again, not all the same types of reservations are going to be available because Atlantis just does some of those things differently. Atlantis charters entire ships. They take over the entire ship, so they do have the power to do that. So the actual answer is, it depends, but usually on Atlantis charter, usually maybe like a week-ish before the actual sailing. By that time, usually Atlantis has had enough time to work with the cruise line to figure out, okay, what can people book in advance on the cruise line's app and what is not? Because what needs to happen is Atlantis needs to work with the cruise line and have the cruise line disable and take off the things from the mobile app or from the website that Atlantis doesn't want people to book, or things that just wouldn't be applicable. So that's like an extra process that Atlantis has to work with the cruise line on, and that takes time. So that's why it may not be, usually it's about a week in advance, and Atlantis usually will send out an email to let people know, okay, dinner, you can book dinner reservations now, or you can book some of the shows. So usually they will tell people, but it's usually about a week or so in advance. Comment from Griffin Swing 626. Every cruise guy says this about leaving the morning because of weather. What they're saying is every cruise guy says not to arrive to the cruise city, the port city, the morning of the cruise. But if you're on the West Coast and are going to a West Coast cruise, you know the weather. We are not nearly as unpredictable when it comes to weather. I've lived like 20-something years on the West Coast, and all I'm going to say is it's not just weather that causes flight delays. So, I mean, in the US, we just had the longest government shutdown in history, at least in like recent history. And, the air traffic controllers and the FAA was under like a lot of pressure. There were like a lot of flights that was canceled. There are sometimes things you can't foresee, sometimes operational things. We've had IT systems issues with several different airlines that have, crippled flights. Sometimes they're like a ground delay. IT issues sometimes can come out of nowhere because everything is everything is electronic and everything's interconnected in that way. I used to work in IT, by the way. So yes, you don't get the type of winter storms that you might get on the West Coast as you do on the East Coast, but just remember there are other reasons that flights might be delayed or canceled. That's not the weather. So keep that in mind. It's still not a smart idea, even if weather was an issue, to fly into the city where your cruise is going to set sail the morning of the cruise. All right. Those are all the questions and comments from all of you lovely people. I like doing these like every 2-3 months when there's like a good batch. So definitely encourage all of you. If you have any questions, any comments, just go onto my YouTube channel, Just Joey T, and under any of the cruise or travel videos, you can just type in your comment. And then maybe in a few months' time, I'll do another one of these podcast episodes where I answer your questions and comment on your comments. Until next time, bye y'all.